Good morning, noon, evening, or night. My name is Gina Appleby, and this is the Evolution of Beauty. Let's start with the basics. Standards of beauty are dynamic, meaning they change over time. For example, Victorian era dresses have fallen a bit out of style. What causes those standards to change? Well, in order to answer that, you need to look at the beginning. Back then, fashion and style were only really developed in big civilizations, like the Chinese dynasties in ancient Egypt/Europe. Most people wore clothing for warmth or practicality. Many Europeans wore headdresses because of religious reasons, and the most revealing part of some of these dresses are the tight sleeves. Scandalous! On the other hand, there are very few, if any, images of Native American or South African fashion, because there was a big disconnect. For Africa, there was the Sahara, and the Americas, the Atlantic Ocean. However, traditions where we can see what they wore on special occasions have remained. Westernization played a big part in the global standards of beauty from the 1500s onward, but before that, the Silk Road was responsible for most shared cultures. Europe and Asia and Africa, oh my! People could trade illnesses, goods, ideas, and, you guessed it, silk. There was another big movement around the same time, from the 1300s to the 1700s, give or take a few decades. The Renaissance is, to this day, the most influential movement in art since ever. Artists like Michelangelo, Raphael, Botticelli, and Da Vinci were painting and sculpting masterpieces on the regular. There was a huge range of people featured in these, from royalty to peasants to gods and goddesses. They really covered the bases. With their range of social classes, they also showed a range of clothing. Strangely enough, though, there were never any people of color. Weird, huh? That said, there was some diversity in body types, such as this statue of Aphrodite, which prominently displays her fat rolls and thick thighs. Now, as I was saying, Westernization. The Americas get discovered, Christopher Columbus indirectly ruins everybody's lives, Europe takes over everything, blah blah blah. We've all taken world history. But that whole Europe takes over everything thing actually has to do with the evolution of fashion. They popularized Western clothing like it was, I don't know, like a plague or something. A plague of fabric and smallpox. And once America stopped fighting off England, they turned to the First Nations. Native Americans weren't permitted to speak their own language, practice their own religion, or, you guessed it, wear their own traditional clothes. It was forced assimilation, and it was so effective that those cultures seemed to be little more than a chapter in a textbook. And the Americas weren't the only place. South Africa was bombarded by hopeful colonizers as well. Remember what I said earlier about the Sahara Desert? Yeah, well, the Europeans were bypassing it via the Atlantic Ocean, and they weren't overly invested in preserving the culture either. I'm happy to announce that the Europeans didn't do as well as they hoped. All of Africa has a rich culture that's millennia old and still evolving with the times. This has brought us up to the 17 or 1800s, and I think it's about time to skip forward a few years. It's over now to our junior fashion correspondent, Gina Appleby, for some information on more recent developments on today's changing standards of beauty. Gina?
Thanks, Gina. Now you know all about how beauty has evolved over thousands of years, but globalization is really changing the game. Never before have so many cultures had the chance to communicate and share ideas. Now, when you're thinking of globalized fashion, don't think of it as around the globe. Think of it as one big community. Because, by historical standards, we're connected on a whole new level. The last 100 years or so have seen the rise of advertisements, and the most obvious trend of all, the skinny movement. Gross. Talk about rude. All of a sudden, women had expectations thrown at them, often from decade to decade. Here's one from 10 years before. That one's pretty cringeworthy too. Women were being pulled in every which direction, and movies were not helping at all. See, body shaming is a pretty new thing, and it really sucks. Nowadays, women are paradoxical. We need flat stomachs, big butts, large breasts, small waists. We need to be tall, but not taller than boys. We can't be prudes, but we shouldn't be easy. Sounds pretty tough. Anyway, back to you, Gina.